Hey, what's up? Andrew Kramer here for VideoCopilot.net, and welcome back to another very exciting tutorial. Today, we're going to be taking a look at recreating this solar star effect inside of After Effects. In fact, we're going to only be using the built-in tools of After Effects, so no third-party plugins. However, I will be talking about our heat distortion plugin as an option or an alternative, but not required. And what the heck, it's our plugin, so, we're going to plug it. All right, let's go and take a look at the final shot. All right, so pretty cool. You can see a lot of nice detail, and let's be honest, if you're anything like me, this is probably the most sun you've got in a long time, and, that's okay. We're learning stuff. Those guys might be at the beach having a good time, getting some sun, hanging out, but we're learning stuff. We get the knowledge. What do they get? Skin cancer. All right, so let's go and create a new composition, my vitamin D deficient followers, and let's create it, let's see. And let's set it to 1280 by 640. So that'll be a 2:1 aspect ratio. And we'll make it 24 frames per second and 10 seconds long. Looks good. We'll hit OK. All right, so here are the elements we need to create. The first thing is the star surface, and this is what we're going to be creating, and it's got a lot of detail, and we're also going to be creating this torch element, which is sort of like an animated 2D effect. But I'll be showing you how it all comes together right now. Let's go and create a new solid, and we'll just call this background, and we want it to be black. So that looks good. And then we're going to create another solid, so we'll do layer, new, solid. And this time, I want to make it much larger. So we're going to do something like 4096 by 2048. So this is a 4K comp. And we'll call this star map. And you can see it's 2:1, and we'll hit OK. So if I pull out here, you can see this layer is actually quite large. And what I want to do is pre-compose it into a separate comp. So choose layer, pre-compose. It might be right off the screen. And we're going to leave all of the attributes in the sun. So we'll just call this star map and hit OK. So now I'm going to go inside of that comp. So we'll double click. And now I want to add a fractal noise. So we'll come over here, type in fractal, and we'll take the fractal noise effect, drop it on there. And this is kind of where we can start experimenting. Now, in the final project, it's made up of 3 separate fractal noise elements. So we have this one. It's kind of twirly. We've got another one, kind of looks like energy, and then we have another one that's just some very small detail. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly like this, but let's go and play around with some of the settings. So let's change this to dynamic, and let's go down to the sub settings, and let's see if we can play with the rotation here. So as we rotate this, we're going to start getting a little twisting effect. So let's bring the brightness down and twist that a little bit more, and you can kind of see how this is looking. So it's kind of similar to our other project. And let's go and just play with the rotation a little bit more. Something like that. I think that looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit brighter. Looks good. And then we're going to duplicate the layer. So Control D. And for this one, we're going to go to the transform and scale up the fractal noise. So scale it up here. Add more detail, so complexity, turn that up to like 15. And then I'll just add a lot more of that fine detail. Scale it up even more. And let's go to the sub settings again and just play with some of these settings till we want this to really look like energy as we saw from that other example. So as we turn up the sub scaling here, you can see it creates a much more interesting pattern. So then we'll take it and we'll screen it back on top. So we'll hit F4, change the transfer mode to screen. And believe me, fractal noise is just one of those effects you just play with. There's no really right way to do it. You just get in there, play around with the settings, and you'll never ever be able to recreate what you created before. Like, I'm amazed that this is even close. So definitely have some fun. Let's do a little more contrast on this. Bring the detail down. Let's see. Brightness down. Cool. All right, so let's create one more, and this is going to be our high frequency noise, and we'll just, we can just duplicate this one more time, and we'll solo it so we can check it out. Let's bring the scale down very low. So what we want to do is turn the contrast up and the brightness down. So we want to create a lot of small, very bright detail. So maybe we'll set this to clip, and let's see. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. Maybe just scale it up a bit and turn it off. So this is our final texture that we're going to be using. And maybe we'll even add a little bit more contrast so we can bring the detail out on this. That looks cool. Now, some of you may remember that we did some work on the movie Star Trek Into Darkness, and we actually used some similar techniques, and you can actually take a look at this online, but we used some various fractal noise effects that were combined to create some of this effect. And although we used Element 3D, some of the techniques are actually quite similar. But anyway, check that out. Obviously, we encourage people to use Element 3D, but there's still a lot you can do inside of After Effects. So that's why we're showing you that here today. So here is the basic star map. So let's go and close that. And here we have the layer for that star map. So coming back to where we were. Now there's an effect called CC Sphere, and it's a really cool effect. And so now we have a nice sphere. So I'm going to go into the shading, and let's set the diffuse, all these values down to 0. And we're going to set the ambient up to 100. And that way there's no shading, it's just full bright. And if we go up to the rotation here, you can actually see we've got a nice rotating planet. Now we do have some polar issues, which I could get into solving, but since we're only going to be using half of this element, I think it would just be better to just to move on and act like we didn't even see it. Now, actually, I do want to show you one cool trick, and that is to get this to behave somewhat three-dimensionally. So the one nice thing about Element 3D is that you actually get a real 3D sphere that reacts to lighting and the camera and all that kind of stuff. Now, CC Sphere can do that with a little bit of work. So here's what we're going to be doing. First of all, let's make this layer 3D. Okay. Now, then I'm going to create a camera. And we'll do 35 millimeter, hit OK. So if I move around, you can kind of see that it's a 3D layer. Not quite 3D the way that we want. All right, so what we want to do is get this to rotate as the camera moves around. So there's some expressions that are going to help us do that. Now, if you don't like expressions, that's okay. You can just copy and paste it. That's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm going to hold down Alt, click on the stopwatch, and then I can type it in down here. So we'll take all this, delete it, and Control V to paste it. And we'll make some more room here. Now we can copy the other two. The only variation is it goes 0, 1, 2. So what I'll do is I'll Alt-click, paste, and change that 0 to a 1. Click on the Z rotation, paste, change that 0 to a 2. Basically, what this expression is saying is to rotate towards the active camera. All right, so my layer is a 3D layer. I've got a camera. Now watch what happens when I take the orbit tool and fly around here. Uh-oh, something weird happens. Not quite what we want. So there's one more step, and that is to right-click on the layer and choose Transform Auto Orient and change it to Orient towards Camera. So now, for the most part, we'll be able to rotate around this like a 3D object. Now, it's not perfect. There are some expressions that will get you there, but this is the easiest way to achieve what we need to achieve. Now, to optimize our quality, what I want to do is scale the layer down a bit and turn up the radius of the sphere. So we'll just scale this up. And that way, when we get close to it, we're going to keep as much of that detail as possible. So what I'll do is move it about right here. And to get rid of this polar cap, let's just rotate it forward. And there we go. All right, so now we've got our base star. All right, so now we want to create the glow around our star. What we're going to do is create a new white solid. So we're going to make it square. So we'll do like 1024 by 1024, and we'll make it white. And this will be our glow. And we'll hit OK. And what I want to do is double click on the ellipse tool. And that's going to add a perfect circle to our layer. So you can kind of see if we scale this down, perfect circle. So what I'll do is I'll make it a 3D layer, turn that switch on, and then I'm going to put it below our star layer. And then if I right click on it and choose Transform Auto Orient, set it to Orient Towards Camera, then all we have to do is scale it down. Hit S, scale it down until it perfectly aligns. Perfectly, I said. Okay. All right, so for this particular glow, what we'll do is add a blur effect and crank it up a bit. Then we can duplicate the layer, add another glow, crank that up a bit, and maybe just lower the opacity of these, hit T. Might play around with this a little bit later. But the reason we're doing it this way rather than adding a glow effect is that it will stay on our layer and stay the right size no matter where the camera is. The other thing we need to do is create an inner glow. So if we take the glow layer, duplicate it, let's put it above and then delete the fast glow. Then we'll hit M. And what I like to do here is duplicate the mask. So we'll do Edit, Duplicate, set the second copy to Subtract, then go down to the mask settings for the mask feather and crank that up so you can kind of see adding a little bit of glow around the edge. Now let's go to full res just to make sure we get this edge perfect. So let's see. Go to mask 1 and maybe just change the expansion a bit, open it up. That'll work. And then we'll go back to half res. Now, in order to make this a little bit more realistic, we'll hit Control D. And then let's go to that feathering on the mask and just crank it down a little bit. So just kind of a really tight halo around the star there. So this is the basic setup for our glow. And I think that looks pretty good. All right, so now we need to create one more comp that represents our torch elements. All right, let's go and create another solid. So we'll do Layer, New Solid, call this Torch, and we'll set it to 1280 by 640 and hit OK. And we're actually going to pre-compose this layer as well. So Layer, Pre-compose, and we'll call this Torch, leave all the attributes. So then if we double click and come over here to our blank layer, and we're going to add another fractal noise. So we'll take that, drop it on here, and let's play with this. So let's do dynamic progressive and go to these sub settings. Play with the rotation here until it kind of looks more like energy like that. And let's tweak the settings. Let's go full. So the influence is going to be kind of a way to add some various detail. Those two settings are cool. And let's turn up the complexity as well. Then we'll scale up the transform. So transform, scale. Bring the brightness down. And that looks pretty good. So one of the things that we haven't done yet is add animation to our fractal noise. And there's a couple of different ways to do that. One of the ways to do that is to animate the evolution. So that's just this value here. It kind of creates some cool movement. And the quickest way to do that is to alt-click and type in something like time times, 150. And what that will do is use the current time multiplied times 150 and basically just create a constant continuous animation. That's a really good way to do it. I might even crank that up, maybe even like 200. Now, the other thing we want to do is because the fire is burning away from the sun, we want to animate this fractal to move up. So if we go to the transform, there's actually a way to do that using this offset. So check this out. As I animate this, it kind of moves it up. Now, we could actually just keyframe this. So if we click on the stopwatch, move forward to the end, we can just animate this up. And that might be a fine way to do it. There are some expressions you can use as well. I think this looks pretty good. And the other thing I did is add a turbulent displace. And I want to shout out Ryan Connolly for making that a household name. We appreciate that. So turbulent displace, we drop that onto our layer. And again, we're going to animate the evolution so that it moves around. So we'll alt-click time times 100. And so now we've got a lot of animation. So let's just look at this. We'll set a range, hit 0. You can use the time controls up here just to play it back. Now, if we want to slow this down, two things we can do. One, we can lower the evolution setting. So we could do 175. We could also go to that keyframe. So if you hit U, it'll show the keyframes. And we can take this value and we can lower it. And that way it doesn't move as fast. But the nice thing is we'll actually be able to adjust that as we go. All right, so this is looking pretty good. Maybe a little more contrast. And maybe a little secret weapon I like to use. We do Effect, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask. And it's actually pretty cool. We go in here, crank up the amount of sharpness. And it helps to really, and maybe the threshold just a slight bit. And it just kind of helps to give it more of a fiery look. It's kind of subtle. Okay, so let's go back to our sun comp. And now we have our torch layer. So the one thing we need to do is add a circle mask or an ellipse mask to this. So we just add that, hit F, feather it, and maybe hit MM and bring the feathering in. Basically, we want to create an edgeless element, just like that. And we might even take the bottom and straighten it out a bit like that. So cool. And then we'll hit F4, change it to screen so that it blends over the background. So you can kind of see that. And then we'll make it a 3D layer. Switch between that too many times. And so right now it's at the exact position as our sun. So we'll hit S, scale it down a bit. And maybe we'll put it below all of our elements. And one of the things actually is because it's not set to face the camera, it may render on top. So what we can do is we can separate that by doing new adjustment layer. And what this will do, so if we keep this as a 2D layer, so we don't turn that on, and if we put it between those layers, it'll actually break up the order. So we'll just call this divider. And that way we're just getting the look we want. So now if we move the torch element up, we can start seeing how that's going to look. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is take these glow elements actually and change them from normal to screen. So let's select them and change it to screen. And that way they'll blend with our background a little bit nicer. Now, one thing you might notice is that I'm working in 32 bits per channel, and that's basically the color range. Now, you don't have to work in 32 bits, but there's some specific things I want to show you that we can take advantage of. Now, because we're working in 32 bits, there's one thing we have to do, and that is go to the fractal noise layers and make sure our overflow is set to clip. And that won't change much, but it'll just make it so that our values don't create negative values. So let's go to the star map, and I think we did that already. So let's set it to clip and set it to clip. So now if we come back to our design, let's go and work on the colorization. So we'll create a new adjustment layer, and we're going to add a curves adjustment. So here's what we'll do. We'll go to the red channel, crank this up a bit, go to the blue channel and bring this down. That's looking good. And then go to the green channel and just kind of create a little contrast. So, go. So this is looking good. We can actually go to the star map or our star layer and maybe darken it. So let's do curves adjustment, bring it down the darkness. And the other thing I want to do is make our inner glow a little bit more intense. So let's take one of these layers and maybe Control D and hit F, and let's bring that feather value up more. So I really want this to feel very three-dimensional. So I think that looks pretty good. Now, the other thing we need to do is add some animation to the fractal noise on our star as well. So if we jump over to the star map, or we can just double click on the star map, we can add just a little bit of animation. So if we go to each one of these fractal noises and we have the evolution, let's alt click on it. We'll type time times, say, 90. That'll give it a little bit of movement. And then on the next one, we'll do maybe something just slightly different. Time times 140. And then on the final one, again, something slightly different. So alt-click, time, star, I don't know, 175. And the different speed will hopefully give this a little bit more of an organic look. So let's see here. All right, so this is looking pretty good. Now, I think our fire element could use a little bit of work, but we can definitely kind of see where this is going. The other thing I want to do is make our glow a little bit more prominent that's in the background. So what I can do is take this tighter glow and duplicate it. So Control D, and maybe lower the blur amount so that just looks a little bit more gradual. You can kind of see how that looks. Now, you don't have to use 32 bits per channel, and to switch you can just alt-click and cycle through 8, 16, and 32-bit. So probably not going to be much of a difference right now between 32-bit and 16-bit. But if you are using 32 bits per channel, I like to set the glows or any of our transfer modes. Instead of using screen, I like to use add. Now, one thing you'll notice is that it looks a little bit more blown out, and that's just because of the transfer mode. But what we can do is we can do a really cool thing called highlight compression. So if we come over here, we could take this highlight compression utility and put it before our curves adjustment. And what that will do is compress the highlight values so that they don't blow out as much. And that way we can kind of get that nice look without having to work on, recompositing all these elements. All right, so I think that'll be good for now. So let's take our one torch element, let's change it to green so we can see the different copies. Now, I'm going to hit F and bring that feathering down, and we just want to make sure that we don't cut the edge of this off. And the other thing I'm noticing is we don't want it to be too contrasted. So let's bring the contrast to about there. All right, so now here's the fun part. What we need to do is start duplicating copies of this torch element. So Control D, and we'll move a copy over here, rotate it, maybe scale it down, and offset the time. So if we say go to exactly 2 seconds, let's offset the time so that the tendrily fire effect looks a bit different. And we can also scale it differently. So we just want to randomly mix it up. So duplicate another layer, stick one over here. You can even push some of these kind of further in Z space to kind of mix it up a bit. And then we can duplicate it again and scale it down and put it really close to the edge here. And we can even say stretch it out just a bit. And for this, we want to make sure that we offset the time as well. So let's offset the time, stretch it out a bit. And we can also add a curves adjustment to these smaller copies. And this will just give it an opportunity to create, just a little bit more contrast so that they pop out a little bit more. Let's see. Something like that. It's always about having multiple levels of detail. And even to the point of, duplicating the layers, flipping it over, scaling it down, and just filling in all these sort of gaps. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. Let's do a couple more copies here and scale this one up a bit. Offset the time. Got to make sure to randomize the time here. This large one, duplicate that. Push it back in Z space even, scale it up some more, offset the time. And we can even lower the opacity of some of these elements too. So you really just want to mix it up so you can really see that we're just layering these in to get them to look right. And so now if we say move the camera around just a bit, we can start to see what this is going to look like. So let's do a simple animation of the camera. So hit P and Shift and A, bring up the point of interest, set a keyframe, slide those over, and then maybe, 3 seconds in, let's just push the camera in. So just right click. You can use these tools here and maybe just drag it forward. We want that foreground planet to feel like it's parallaxing a bit, like we can actually see there is volume. And let's see how that looks. All right, so this is looking really good. Let's take that sun and let me show you a few kind of finishing effects. Let's put it into a new comp, and we'll rename this sun output. And this is where we're going to do just a couple of final effects. Now, if we want to add a little bit of kind of heat distortion, we could use a basic effect called turbulent displace. And if we're careful, we could bring the size, let's see, really small, and animate just a little bit of amount, and then just kind of animate the evolution here. So let's just take this, move forward 3 seconds, and just kind of animate the evolution. So that's a pretty good way to just add a little bit of that kind of heat wave. Now, there are some other more complicated ways to create heat distortion, and because of that, we actually created an entire heat distortion plugin. So it's only $25, but it really adds a very nice heat distortion effect. So let me show you that, and it's the first time it's available by itself. So if we come over here and type in heat distortion, drop that on here, what it does is it not only adds displacement and noise, so you can kind of see here how this looks, it also adds these kind of like heat haze effect. And I think it's really nice, especially for times when you want to add a little bit of an organic punch. So you can really kind of see this kind of organic feel to it. There's some different types of noise, so like incendiary, which creates a more fiery type of noise. Now, the basic way it works is that you have the distortion amount, and that's the actual displacement, and then you have the heat amount, which controls the blur or the haze effect. And then there's one other control, the heat bias, that blends between those two values. And these three values alone will really make a big difference. And then you have the noise scale. So noise scale will help you focus, how large you want it to be. And then there's some cool things like wind and even some different noise patterns, depending on the look you're going for. So pretty cool and pretty powerful, some advanced options. All right, so this is our heat distortion plugin. Now, the other thing that you're going to probably want to do is fade this effect in so you can really see that detail. So I think that's part of what makes this effect cool. And the way to do it is to go to the color correction and add a exposure effect. And we want to put the exposure effect before all of the effects. And so what this will allow us to do, so exposure and gamma correction. So hit U, bring these two keyframes over, and bring the exposure down. Bring the gamma down and just keep lowering this until it's fading out. And let's bring that exposure down really low and maybe spread this out. All right, so now what this is going to do is fade this in nicely so we can really start to see that halo as the entire effect fades in. So I think that's part of what makes this effect fun, is that really subtle fade in. So let's right click on these keyframes and set it to easy ease. Maybe even move them over a bit. And then just make sure that any of your offset layers are long enough for the effect to fade on all the way. All right, so this is looking pretty cool. So if you're doing like a title or maybe like a superhero effect, maybe you've got a superhero who, I don't know, somehow gets his power from the sun and has like super strength and, laser vision. This effect is perfect. All right, well, anyways, I hope you guys liked the tutorial. If you like the sound design that was on the main video, that was actually created with our new product, Motion Pulse, which is coming out in a couple of weeks, so keep an eye on that. It's basically sound effects for motion design. Here's a little bit of idea what that looks like. So basically, it's like sound design tools specifically for motion graphics and, bringing that kind of stuff to life. So please check that out. Always helps to support the website and all the tutorials. Anyways, my name is Andrew Kramer. Thank you for watching. Follow us on Twitter. Check out the blog. A lot of cool things happening. And we will see you next time.